Hello YouTube, today we're talking about the very first human empire ever to exist on Tamriel in another Elder Scrolls lore video. We're talking about the first Nordic Empire. This topic was requested by the YouTube user Robert Harris, and when I saw the request I really wanted to look into it, because I've always known a lot about, well, the Imperial empires, but I've never really looked into the Nordic Empire. Now I must warn you that this is just a summary of what can be said, and it took a really long time to assess all the sources. So I want to keep it short for now, but I hope I can make it more worth your while with this little summary. So without further ado, let's immediately kick off. The first Nordic Empire was a state existing in northern Tamriel in the First Era, from the year 240 until the year 416. Not that long, just under 200 years. The empire's origins lay within the kingdom of Skyrim, which had been founded by the Isgrimor dynasty in the Meretic era. The 15th ruler of this kingdom, King Vrag the Gifted, who was the grandson of King Harald we all know and love, was the one that officially started the Nordic Empire when he started conquering other regions of Tamriel. The Nordic Empire was the first human empire, and its existence marked the definitive ending of the elvish empires of Tamriel. Many of the structures we actually see in Skyrim, like the ancient Nordic ruins, are still product of this empire. And also, for example, in Elder Scrolls Online, when you visit the city of Bruma, it looks way more Nordic. That's because it still has influences from this first Nordic Empire at this time. But with that said, how did this empire came to be? It all started in the year 240 of the First Era, with the conquests under High King Vrag, as I said before. It would lead to the formation of the first Nordic Empire and would begin when the Kingdom of Skyrim officially annexed the Reach region, with Markarth in it. After successfully conquering the Reach and ousting it from the control of the Reachmen, they ventured beyond the Reach into parts of High Rock, where they actually found the Bretons. At first they thought that the Bretons were elves and started to relentlessly kill off all the Bretons, as they thought they were a breed of Aldmer. But when they discovered that these Bretons were actually humans, the descendants of men that had been enslaved by the elves and that had crossbred with elves, King Vrag sent out on a mission to liberate these men from elvish control. Thus began the conquest of High Rock. After a couple of years they had successfully conquered almost all of High Rock. The campaign had taken longer than expected, because the elves living in High Rock combined with the loyal Bretons to the elves put up quite a fierce magical resistance, but the Nords managed to press on, and their most legendary warriors used the Thuum, or the voice, to shatter the enemy's defenses, and thus was now High Rock under Nordic control. And of course under the control of the Bretons that were actually loyal to the Nords and opposed to elvish rule. During this time, the Nords founded villages all over High Rock for their own soldiers to live. Eventually these communities would grow into full-fledged cities. A good example of this is Dagger Fall, which was originally founded in the year 246 of the First Era and was, and still is, one of the most powerful cities of High Rock. When the conquering of High Rock had been a success, and the regions of High Rock were actually incorporated into the Western Holds, the lords and jarls of the eastern holds of Skyrim also wanted their cut of the cake, and thus started to mount a large invasion army to invade Morrowind. The young Nords that had heard of all the glory of the High Rock campaign came from all over Skyrim to fight, and once this invasion force had been formed, the Nordic Empire officially invaded eastern Morrowind, pushing all the way until they had control over all of mainland Morrowind, up until the borders of the swamps of Blackmarsh. The conquest wasn't easy. The Nords were up against the Chimer armies and the Dwemer armies with their advanced technology. However, the Nords pressed on, and due to the rivalry between the Chimer tribes and the rivalry between the Chimer as a people and the Dwemer, they would not unite, and gave only scattered resistance to the massive army of the Nords. Some of the Chimer tribes even supported the Nords with the goal of eliminating their rivals. In this war, the Nords also made heavy use of their legendary warriors, the Tongues, that would use the dragon language or the Thuum to smash their enemies into submission and even change the weather. However, the Nords did not manage to land on Vvardenfell. Even though all their prowess, they couldn't stand against the unified Dwemer kingdom of Vvardenfell, and that kingdom stood strong and repelled the Nordic invaders. However, the Nords now controlled all of mainland Morrowind. but the southern Jarls of Skyrim weren't satisfied. The east and the west both had their new territories now, so they actually started looking to the south, to the Ural Mountains. Unfortunately, these mountains were not fertile or had any value whatsoever, so the High King wouldn't support a conquest of the Ural Mountains. However, they would not have to wait long until they got their own chance for expansion. As in Cyrodiil, the Alessian Empire was in the midst of its creation, in the midst of the Alessian Rebellion, and the leader of the Alessian Rebellion, now known as Saint Alessia, requested the Nords for aid against the Alliates, against whom they were rebelling. In exchange for military aid, Saint Alessia promised the Nords all sorts of things. She promised them favorable trade deals and would also promise them land in Nibelheim. This interested the southern Jarls, and then they prompted the High King to send large portions of troops to Cyrodiil and aid the founding of the Alessian Empire by fighting against the Alliates side by side with the Alessian Rebellion. The Nords and the Alessians pushed through, and the Alliates were driven out, resulting in the founding of the Alessian Empire and large sections of Nibelheim going to the Nordic Empire. From that point on, the Alessian Empire and the Nordic Empire would always have a sort of loose alliance, helping each other in times of need, as we will see later in this video. When King Vrag died, after a long and successful conquest, he was succeeded by High King Gelir. Gelir had nothing left to conquer, except for the Dwemer city-states in Skyrim. These city-states, which we can also visit in Skyrim, had never really bowed to the rule of the Nordic Empire and still held out. However, it is at this time that the Aetherium Wars, a civil war between the Dwemer, finally had ended. They were once again at peace, but very much weakened, and the High King Gelir used this opportunity to crush the city-states of the Dwemer and also subject them to his rule. During Gelir's reign, not much happened. The empire stabilized and was generally peaceful and just stable. After the death of Gelir, King Borgas took the throne. Borgas created a stronger alliance with the Alessian Empire, and when in the year 358 he was at risk of losing High Rock to the increasingly more powerful Durrani hegemony, on which I will do a video somewhere in the future, the Alessian Emperor at the time sent troops to help him, but it was to no avail, and the Nordic Empire had ultimately lost High Rock to the Durrani hegemony. However, this act of sending troops really demonstrates how good the relations between the two nations were. Borgas also outlawed the original Nordic pantheon and instead accepted the Alessian pantheon of the 8 divines as we know it. Later in his reign, he and the Alessian Emperor at the time wanted to go to war against Valenwood, as the Camoran king at the time had backed out of an important agreement with both. However, to prevent war, the Camoran dynasty initiated the Wild Hunt and used this opportunity to assassinate the king Borgas. Borgas didn't have any heirs at that point. He was still, well, fairly young, and the mood of Jarls actually failed to appoint a new king. Thus this caused for the first Skyrim Civil War, also called the War of Succession. A period of long infighting between the Jarls, even raiding other cities in Skyrim like Windhelm, the heart of the Nordic Empire. This period of instability was used by the conquered people to free themselves. The Reach quickly fell to the Durrani hegemony and to the Reachmen. Morrowind was lost when the Chimer war chief Indril Nerevar and the Dwemer king Dumek united to drive the Nordic forces out of their land. I actually did a video partly on this on Morrowind history. I really recommend you check it out. And the Nibelheim land that had fallen under the Nordic Empire also declared independence as a merchant state. Meanwhile, the Skyrim Civil War continued, and there was not much left of Skyrim's former glory. It was at this time that Skyrim got finally once again reunited under High King Olaf One-Eye, who had conquered all of Skyrim and was now High King. He was actually quite well known at the time because he was the Jarl of Whiterun and he had actually captured a living dragon, Nubenax. Skyrim then reconquered the Reach under his rule, showing that it still had some strength if it was united, but the days of glorious conquest and Nordic empires was over. The Kingdom of Skyrim would continue to exist for many years, but the task of forming empires would from that moment go on to the Imperials and the descendants of Alessia, as we would see later in the Elder Scrolls series. And that was basically a short summary of the Nordic Empire. I really realized that I haven't said it all, but I think that would make the video way too long, and I'm aiming for about 10 to 15 minute videos. So, I hope you liked it. If you did, like, subscribe. If you want personal contact with me, My Discord and Instagram are both in the description. If you want to request a future video, please put that in the comments. I have a request list and I will add everything I see. Can't guarantee I will do them all, but I can at least guarantee that I read them all and add them to my list. And if you want to support me in a more personal way, there is my Patreon. And via my Patreon, you can also get access to my soundtrack, on which I will now give some explanation. Oh hey there, it's me, Zork. You know, the guy you just watched a video from. I have my own soundtrack now. You can hear it in videos sometimes. If you want a high quality download of this soundtrack, you can support me on Patreon and you get the soundtrack for free with that. For only $1 donation you get the main theme, and for $2 donations and up you get the entire album. That's pretty cheap, right? Plus with $1 or $2 to Patreon you also get instant access to all my small vlogs, other Patreon content and your name at the end of every video. It's a pretty good deal, I've heard. If you want to support the channel, of course. So check out my Patreon for more details, it's in the description.